academia is a global profession. And so as part of training the next generation of African academics, they need to have the opportunity to cross-fertilize ideas. When postgraduate students travel to other places, they get the opportunity to also use resources that may be lacking in their home institutions. And then they also provide certain perspectives to their hosts' work, which may otherwise be lacking. And so for me, postgraduate mobility is a win-win situation for the postgraduate student who has to travel to another place and for the host institution.
There's just so much you learn from by being on the ground, by being able to connect with people physically, by being able to see the students that you're teaching, by being able to see the professor whom you're working with in a project, by being able to be exposed to the architecture of even where you are, the ability to also travel around, the ability to experience the culture and the social setting of where you are. I think if we reduce the exposure of traveling abroad to that being just a purely academic exposure, it truly limits the value. Because for me, I felt that I grew more as a person, I grew more as an academic.
Mobility gives better access to publishing opportunities too. We see an increase in international joint publications for those who went on mobility. If the research in an international partnership is well coordinated, mobility can lead to earlier joint publications too. And statistics also show the link between international cooperation and the citation impact of publications. And mobility has an impact on career development for sure. In general, mobility enhances a person's employability at home and abroad. Employability is enhanced through intercultural competence and language skills, and mobility allows to acquire both.
We also do know there's a significant difference between how different academic disciplines experience mobility. Whereas for humanities, it might be possible maybe to replace largely the academic part of the mobility by going virtual. For sciences, for engineering, things that require access to equipment and infrastructure, labs and such things, you cannot really realistically replace this absolutely. But we are also considering how can we utilize also a virtual platform, for example, by simulation, so that where one misses out on going to visit a lab, they can have this experience by simulation. And already we are participating in some programs. Okay, we're still some way to come, but yeah, I think there's a good possibility going into the future.
I think that if postgraduates can't be mobile, even 6 months or 8 months without mobility, it means that those who've already got networks in place or who are working with senior academics who have international networks will be able to deepen those connections. But for those who are just entering their field, if they don't have links in place, they're going to be extremely reliant on already existing links. And I think people will need to be much more creative about making free spaces where they can access strangers in their field.
If we're going to think about how viable or how sustainable alternatives to in-person mobility are, I think the one thing that we have to preface and have upfront in the conversation is equity. Who has access? Who is denied access? How do we ensure that we take barriers to access into consideration? We would miss a trick if we don't use the pandemic opportunity to confront the unjust and inequitable access to mobility that existed before the pandemic, and frame our thinking in terms of developing alternatives squarely, starting from the point of how do we do it differently.